Alright, let us dive deep into the story of the most beautifully confused monster to ever swim the ancient seas. But before we begin our 10-minute descent into prehistoric madness, let's get a quick recap of the creature we're dealing with today. Imagine, if you will, a 60-foot-long primitive whale. Now, make it look exactly like a giant sea serpent. Give it a skull powerful enough to crush a small car, and just for kicks, add a pair of tiny, completely useless hind legs that it still has from its land-dwelling ancestors. This, my friends, is Basilosaurus, and it is an absolute masterpiece of prehistoric weirdness. It's the kind of creature that makes you question everything you thought you knew about evolution. So, buckle up, because we're about to unravel the bizarre tale of the king lizard. Our story begins not in the warm Eocene seas, but in the dusty fields and quarries of the American South during the 1800s. People started unearthing these gigantic, fossilized vertebrae. We're talking bones so long and serpentine that they defied belief. When these fossils made their way to the scientific community, the experts were, to put it mildly, intimidated. Faced with a 60-foot-long skeleton that looked for all the world like a colossal snake, they did what any sensible 19th-century paleontologist would do. They assumed it was a reptile. A really, really big one. The renowned anatomist Richard Harlan was one of the first to formally describe it. Staring at this immense, serpent-like creature, he gave it a name that oozed power and reptilian majesty, Basilosaurus, which translates literally to king lizard. It seemed fitting. The bones suggested a creature that ruled the ancient oceans, a marine reptile to dwarf even the mighty mosasaurs that had dominated the seas millions of years before. They pictured a scaly, cold-blooded leviathan, the undisputed monarch of its watery kingdom. There was just one tiny problem with this epic reptilian picture. They were completely and utterly wrong. It wasn't a lizard. It wasn't a reptile at all. It was a mammal. To be more specific, it was a whale. Yes, this so-called king lizard is your friendly neighborhood dolphin's very angry, very long, and very distant great-grandfather. This revelation came courtesy of Sir Richard Owen, a British paleontologist who, upon examining more complete fossil evidence including the skull and teeth, realized the truth. The teeth weren't the simple, conical spikes of a reptile. They were complex, with different types for slicing and crushing, a hallmark of mammals. Owen tried to rename it Zeuglodon, meaning yoke tooth, to better reflect its mammalian nature. But the rules of scientific naming are strict. The first name given, Basilosaurus, had priority. And so, forevermore, this magnificent whale is stuck with a name that proudly declares it a lizard. It's one of paleontology's greatest, most enduring inside jokes. So what was this creature actually like? Let's travel back about 40 million years to the Eocene epoch. The world was a greenhouse, much warmer than today. Shallow tropical seas covered vast areas that are now dry land, including parts of North America, North Africa, and South Asia. And in these warm, teeming waters, Basilosaurus reigned supreme. It was an apex predator, the most terrifying thing in the water. Forget sharks. Primitive sharks were on the menu for Basilosaurus. Its diet consisted of other early whales, large fish, and pretty much anything else it could clamp its formidable jaws around. Its skull, nearly 5 feet long, was an engine of destruction, delivering bite forces that would make a T-Rex nod in appreciation. But don't picture a modern whale. Basilosaurus was a very different kind of beast. For starters, it didn't have a blowhole on the top of its head like a dolphin or a blue whale. Its nostrils were still in the process of their long evolutionary journey from the tip of the snout to the top of the skull. They were located about halfway up its long snout, meaning it had to awkwardly lift its head much further out of the water to breathe. This also suggests it wasn't a deep diver. Modern whales can hold their breath and plunge into the abyss, but Basilosaurus was likely a creature of the upper layers of the ocean, sticking to the sunlit zone where prey was abundant and the air was just a quick head tilt away. And its body. Its body was the source of all the confusion. It was incredibly long and slender, almost eel-like in its proportions. This anatomy tells us a lot about how it moved. Unlike modern whales that propel themselves with powerful, vertical strokes of their tail flukes, Basilosaurus likely swam with a more sinuous, undulating motion. Imagine a 60-foot snake or a colossal eel, propelling itself through the water with horizontal, side-to-side waves of its body. It would have been a hypnotic, an utterly terrifying sight. This snake-like movement is why those first scientists were so convinced it was a reptile. Evolution hadn't yet perfected the streamlined, torpedo-like body plan of today's cetaceans. Basilosaurus was a fascinating and slightly awkward work in progress. Now we have to talk about the legs. This is without a doubt the most hilarious and baffling part of the Basilosaurus story. Tucked away near the back half of its enormous 60-foot body were a pair of hind legs, complete with a femur, a tibia, a fibula, and even tiny distinct toes. But here's the kicker: they were only about 2 feet long. On a 60-foot animal, that's proportionally smaller than the arms on a Tyrannosaurus rex. They were utterly comically useless for locomotion. They were far too small to help it swim, and they certainly couldn't support its immense weight on land. The connection between the legs and the spine was so weak, they were essentially just dangling there. So what on earth were they for? For a long time, this was a complete mystery. Scientists debated endlessly. Were they vestigial leftovers? Evolutionary baggage from their land-walking ancestors that just hadn't disappeared yet? That's definitely part of the story. Basilosaurus's ancestors, like Pachysodus and Ambulocetus, were semi-aquatic mammals that walked on 4 legs. The transition to a fully aquatic life meant those hind legs became less and less important. But why keep them at all? The current leading theory is as strange as the creature itself. Some paleontologists suggest they might have been used as claspers during mating, to help the male get a better grip on the female's long, slippery body in the water. It's an intimate and slightly absurd solution to a very real biological problem. They were not legs for walking or swimming, but perhaps for hugging. They were biological ornaments with a very specific and very private function. So let's put it all together. We have a 60-foot-long snake-like whale eel that spent its days cruising the warm surface waters of the Eocene. It couldn't sing complex songs or dive to the crushing depths. It had to awkwardly poke its nose out of the water to breathe. It hunted primitive sharks and its own smaller whale cousins with a car-crushing bite. And it did all of this while sporting a pair of tiny, vestigial hind legs that may or may not have been used for romantic encounters. It's a creature that seems designed by a committee of mad scientists. It's the living embodiment of an evolutionary transition, caught between 2 worlds. It hadn't quite let go of its terrestrial past, but it was fully committed to its new life as a marine terror. The story of Basilosaurus is a perfect example of how science is a process of discovery, of getting things wrong before you get them right. It's a 60-foot-long lesson in not judging a fossil by its cover. When its bones were first found, they told a story of a giant sea reptile, a king lizard. But the more we learned, the weirder and more wonderful the story became. It became the tale of a mammal trying its very best to be a sea serpent, a whale that looked like a dragon but still had its tiny, useless feet. It's a creature that makes paleontologists look a little foolish, and we love it for that. It's a reminder that the history of life on this planet is stranger, funnier, and more brilliantly bizarre than we could ever imagine. It is 100% factual-ish, because only in the deep, ancient past could nature produce something so wonderfully, so perfectly wrong. Thanks for joining us on this dive into prehistoric weirdness. If you enjoy stories that prove history is just a series of very strange guesses and happy accidents, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We've got plenty more where that came from. See you next time.